What's going on, guys? Today my topic is going to be on constant current drivers and what exactly happens when your total circuit voltage drop of your COBs is either higher or lower than the rated constant current region of the driver. So when you're wiring COBs in series, the forward voltage of each COB adds up. If you have a COB that's typically 35 volts at a given current, and you add another one, then you're going to have a total voltage drop of 70 volts. For example, I've got a Meanwell HLG 185H C1400 driver, and this guy's rated to do 1400 milliamps between a voltage range of 71 and 143. In my typical setup in my tent, I've got 4 Cree CXB 3590s, and they usually have about 35 volts across each of them at 1400 milliamps for a total of about 140 volts for the whole circuit, which is fine. Obviously, that's between the rated constant current region of 71 and 143 for that driver. But what I wanted to do was add another COB in series, so we're 140 plus another, say, 35 volts, should give us about 175 volts of total voltage drop requirement. When I hook this little Vero up, some weird things happen. As soon as I turn it on, you can see that the circuit voltage is 143.2, which I think is the max that little driver can produce, but the current on that clamp ammeter is 0. And the COB does light up, but just barely. It's like there's just enough power to light each of those little diodes a tiny little bit. And the same thing happens on all the CXB 3590s. You can see that there's a little bit of power, but there's really no light being produced because there's no current flowing through it. So on the other end of the spectrum, what happens if we're way under this constant current range? I've got just one single Vero hooked up now, and you can see the total circuit voltage is just over 35 volts, but the current is pretty much where it should be. I'm showing up about 1300 milliamps, and this clamp is not totally accurate, but it's close enough. So 1300 milliamps at about 35 volts, and I think the minimum I said was 71 volts for this constant current range on this particular driver, so we're essentially half of that. We're 30 volts, 35 volts beneath the minimum, and it seems to run pretty much just fine. Even when I dim it down to, say, 30 volts, there's next to no current running through it, but it is still lighting it, and then when you bring it back up to full power, it's right back up to almost 1400 milliamps. I did notice one weird thing, though. If I listened carefully, I could hear sort of a very faint, high-pitched noise coming from the driver, kind of like a squeal almost. That was very quiet, but still is normally not there when you're running it at a proper voltage. I noticed that the squeal kind of changed pitch depending on how much I had dimmed the driver too, so something odd was going on there. It looked like it was working a bit harder than it should be, and you may be okay if you're maybe a handful of volts below what the minimum is. You know, if you're 5 volts under or something, that would probably be okay, but being at half of what the minimum is, I think would cause problems long term. I'm not sure how long it would take, but nonetheless it's not exactly working as it should.